Well, good morning. Really glad you guys are here. I'm very, very excited about today. We're starting a brand new series. If you're a guest today, my name's Trey. I am the pastor here. Thanks for joining us in the room. Thank you for joining us online. And we're going to have a really fun time over the next 4 weeks because we're going to be talking about something that is truly universal. Every person in this room, every person online, every person you know needs, we're going to talk about starting today. And not only do we all need it, we all struggle with it. So it's a perfect topic for us at church. And so what we're going to talk about, very simply, is relationships. All sorts of relationships. A lot of times in churches when they say relationships, what they mean is romantic love. And that is going to be a component of what we talk about. But we're really going to talk about all the relationships we have in our life. And it was funny, as I was beginning this process, it occurred to me that I didn't actually know the definition of a relationship. And so I looked it up. And here's the definition. It's the way in which two or more concepts, objects, or people are connected. And I highlight that word connected because that's really the core of a relationship. It's a connection. We all have connections in our lives. Some of our connections have lasted decades. Some of them have lasted weeks. Some of them last 30 seconds. We'll be in line at the grocery store, and we'll make eye contact because the cashier said something funny, and we don't know what to do with it. And so we make contact with the other person, we both giggle, and we move on with life. End of connection. The relationship is over. But we all have these connections in our lives. And if the connection you have in your life does last longer than the 30 seconds it takes to giggle in line at the grocery store, more than likely you are going to run into some obstacles in your relationships, some obstacles in your connections. And sometimes people decide that relationships have too many obstacles, that relationships have too many complications, that they're too much work, and so they give up on relationships. I know when I'm saying that we all need relationships, I know, I've been doing this long enough, there are some people in the room who probably think, I don't need relationships, I'm good. I tried relationships, I tried having friends, I tried having family, but everybody let me down, everything kept getting broken, so I'm good on my own. I can handle myself. I don't need other people. Look, I understand if life has taught you that that's true. All I would say is the author of life disagrees. See, the God of the universe, when he created us, he did not create us to be alone. Maybe you actually know the story, maybe you don't. God created the heavens and the earth, and we have this all written down for us in the book of Genesis, which is the first book in our Old Testament. And basically the story goes like this. God would create something, and then he would look at himself and he would say, it's good, because he's God, and it was good. And so he would say, God created the heavens and the earth, and he said, it's good. God created the land and the sea, and he said, it's good. God created animals, and he said, it's good. God created man and created a home for this man named Adam, the Garden of Eden. He put him in the garden, and he said, it is good. And then God took a step back, and he said, you know what? It's not good. Because he noticed something, and this is what he noticed. The Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. Now, this is before sin had entered the world. This is before struggle had entered the world. This is God's perfect creation. And when he created Adam, he was alone. And it's the first time in human history God said, you know what? That's not good. And so he created a partner for Adam. Her name was Eve. And the rest is history. But what God makes clear in that moment is, even if life teaches us it might be okay to be alone, he says it's not good for us to be alone. He has designed us for connection. He has designed us for relationship. And not only has he designed us for relationship, he actually gives us instructions in relationship. He tells us how to have great relationships, how to have thriving relationships. So, if you're here today and you've sort of given up on the whole connection thing, my prayer is over the next few weeks, God might rekindle that desire and to begin to restore your faith and your ability through him to reconnect with other people. Maybe you're here today and you have some relationships, but you kind of feel like they're hanging on by a thread. Some friendships, maybe it's a dating relationship, maybe it's a marriage relationship. My prayer beginning today and over the next few weeks is that God can strengthen that relationship. Maybe you're here today and you're like, man, I'm actually pretty good. Like I have friends, I have family, like my life's good. Fantastic. Then you are in the perfect position for this series because you've already got a lot of it figured out, which means God can use you to help other people improve their relationships, and God can actually take your relationship to the next level. Now, when I say to the next level, let me be very clear. If you are dating today, I'm not saying you'll be engaged by the time we're done. That's not the next level I'm talking about. Because again, I keep joking about dating. This is not a dating series. Okay? This is a relationship series. This is a series about all of the connections we have in our life. The peer-to-peer relationship. This really isn't even a parenting series, because that's a different dynamic until children become adults. And then sometimes parents and adults can begin to talk like equals until the parent disagrees with the kid, and then there's the dynamic again. It's crazy. But really, we all have connections in our life, and that's what I want to talk about. Specifically, we're going to be talking about friendships. We're going to be talking about our family. We're going to be talking about brothers and sisters, talking about spouses. We're going to be talking about, the TV's gone. We're going to be talking about, it came back. It's just like Jesus. They're going to talk about our neighbors. You got to roll with it, man. We're going to be talking about our neighbors and our coworkers. Because here's the thing. When you think about every single connection you have in your life, every relationship that lasts longer than 30 seconds, they're either friends, family, neighbors, or coworkers. That's all of them. So here's what I want you to imagine. I want you to imagine every connection you have with your friend and your family and your neighbors and your coworkers. I want you to just imagine right now that they got better. Not perfect, because they're never going to be. But just imagine that they got better. That the tension was a little less, the conversation a little easier, the trust a little stronger, the drama a lot less. Just imagine what life would be like if all those connections just improved, just a little bit. Would your life be better or worse? I think we'd all say better. And so that's why we're beginning this conversation today. That's why we're going to spend the next few weeks talking about it. Because with God's help, I am convinced we can bring better to every connection we have in our lives. And as we do that, I believe that our life will get better as well. So today we're starting this brand new series. We're calling it Relatable. And this is going to be a 4-week series. And I tell you that because I know some people are new to our church. Maybe you're new online, or maybe you aren't sure how series work, because not all series work this way. Sometimes, man, it's easy. You can just pop in, pop out. You can watch one episode and figure it out. But and I say episode because I really think about the way I've been explaining this all day is if you were going to watch a new show on Netflix and it was a 4-episode show, you wouldn't start on episode 3. Because you'd be confused. Because you wouldn't know what happened on episode 1 and episode 2. That's kind of how this series is going to work. To understand everything about relationships that God wants us to know in the next 4 weeks, you really need to see all 4 weeks, and you kind of need to see them in order, which is why we record and why we try to make it easy. But I also say that because today is really, it's just an introduction to the concept. It's an introduction to the target. So we're going to spend a lot of time today really just kind of understand relationships, trying to build some framework. There's a really good chance you might leave today with more questions than you have answers. And that's perfectly okay. That's the design. The goal of today is just to simply get me and you and us thinking about relationships, talking about relationships, and open to inviting God into our relationships. Now, at the end of 4 weeks, if you still have more questions and answers, let's talk. But as for today, we simply just want to introduce the concept of relationships and what God has to say about it. And to do that, I kind of want to start with a bit of a negative question. But it's really what we're all trying to figure out when it comes to relationships. And the question I want to ask is this. Why do relationships fail? Why do the friendships in your life fail? Why do the romantic relationships in your life fail? Why do relationships typically fail? And as I've been thinking about this and studying it, there are really only 3 reasons. There are 3 basic reasons relationships fail. The first is erosion. This basically just means that they fade away over time. Maybe you moved away, maybe you drifted apart, but nothing really caused the relationship to fade. You just woke up one day and realized you weren't friends anymore, that you weren't really close anymore. It would be like if you bought a plant and put it in another room and forgot about it for a month, and you walk in and you're like, oh, that's a shame. That was going to be a good plant. Sometimes that happens to relationships in our life. We just drift away. There's not really a cause. It just kind of fades away. But other times there's a very direct cause, because the second thing that causes relationships to fail is trauma. Sometimes traumatic events break up relationships. These can be internal trauma. These could be external trauma. It could be a betrayal within the relationship. It could be a tragedy in the relationship. It could be external, outside of the relationship. It could be an economic struggle. It could be a death. It could be a serious illness. But this is when something happens and it immediately begins to break up the relationship. So we have erosion, we have trauma, and the third is competition. Sometimes our relationships fail because something replaces that person in our life. It could be another person, it could be a thing, it could be a career, it could be a pursuit. But sometimes we get replaced or someone else gets replaced by someone or something else. Now, I want you to think about every connection you have in your life. Think about the ones that are coming to your mind right now that you've lost. The connections that failed. The connections that no longer exist. And look at these three things. Why'd they fail? Probably eroded over time. Maybe there was some trauma. Or maybe there was some competition. But every relationship you've ever had and I've ever had that failed, one of these three factors was a part of the failure. But here's the interesting thing. These three factors are a part of every failure of a relationship, but not every relationship that experiences these three factors fails. Some relationships survive erosion. Some relationships survive trauma. Some relationships survive competition. In fact, some relationships thrive in these moments. Why? Why is it that some relationships can survive these things and some relationships can't? To me, that is the fundamental question. And the reason it matters is, I'm not sure if you looked at this list, 2 of those 3 are completely out of our control. And even the erosion, we can only play a part. We have no control over the trauma that might happen in our lives, and we have no control over what someone else is going to let compete. We can't control that. So it seems to me that the most important thing we can figure out is, what's the difference in those relationships? How come some relationships thrive through those things and some relationships fail? Well, the answer to that question is what's going to propel us for the next month. And the answer to that question is one word. When I tell you the one word, you're going to want to laugh. You're going to be confused, but okay, hopefully by the end of our time today, you'll understand what I mean, because the one word that I am convinced determines the success or failure of any relationship, its ability to withstand adversity, its ability to thrive or to suffer, is this. It's up there. Climate. I'm going to be honest, this is a little rough, not knowing if the TV's going to work or not. So I appreciate your grace in this moment. And if you think you're having a rough day, imagine being those guys, because they are dying. So we'll all get through this together. All right. So see what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to create a good climate. See, here's how we define climate. Climate is simply, oh no, is it frozen now? Okay, here we go. Climate is the average weather conditions for a given area. We understand the climate. Climate is average temperature, average rainfall, all that kind of stuff. We cannot control the climate. We have to adapt to the climate. We can want as much as we want to plant something that's not going to thrive here, but if it's not meant for this climate, it's not going to thrive. People move because they want a certain climate. We have people who live here now because they were sick of having snow 3 months a year, so they moved here so they could have snow once for like 30 seconds and make fun of us because we go crazy over it. Right? That's why you moved here. We fully, completely understand that in the physical world. We cannot control the climate, so we adapt. And the reason we adapt, the reason we try to go to a better climate is because we understand that the climate determines what will thrive and what will fail. The climate is completely in control of that when you turn to when you think about from a physical climate perspective. For example, where do you think things grow better, the equator or the North Pole? It's a lot easier to grow things at the equator. Lots of stuff's going to grow there. It is actually the most fertile climate on the planet. Lots of things grow there. No matter how hard you try to become a great farmer in the North Pole, it's never going to happen because the climate is in charge. It determines what is going to thrive and what is going to fail. Now, what does this have to do with relationships? Everything. Because just like we live in a physical climate that determines what is going to thrive and what is going to fail. I believe every relationship, every connection we have exists in an emotional climate, an emotional general condition. And that general condition, more than anything else on earth, will determine whether that relationship will thrive or whether it will eventually fail. Which means, for us, there is one clarifying question I can ask and you can ask and we can all ask about every relationship we have in our lives. And we can know instantly how strong it is, how sustainable it is, and as we're going to see over the next 4 weeks, what we can bring to the relationship to strengthen it. And here's the question we're going to start asking. What is the climate of this connection? What is the general emotional situation in this friendship, in this marriage, in this boss-employee relationship, with my neighbor, with my coworker? What is the general condition? What is the climate? Now, you may wonder, where did I get this term climate? Why am I talking about it this way? Well, I did a lot of research for this series. I did a lot of reading, did a lot of studying, and I came across this researcher. This man named John Gottman. And he has been studying relationships for 40 years. And he's pretty much kind of considered an expert, particularly on marriage. He did most of his research is primarily in marriage, but as we're going to see at the end, the lessons he's learned are universal. But he was fascinated by the question that I brought up a moment ago. He was fascinated by why do some marriages last and some marriages don't? How come two couples can experience the exact same thing, that couple thrives, and that couple doesn't make it? He was fascinated by that. And so because he was a scientist, he began doing some research. He began doing some studies. Back in the early 80s at the University of Washington is when he began these studies. And he started with newlywed couples. And so he brought the newlywed couples in, and he hooked them up to all his machines so he could measure their heart rate, he could measure their breathing, he could measure their blood pressure, he could measure if they were sweating or not. He wanted to track their adrenal system and just see how they were going to react when they talked about their spouse. And so he brought these couples in, hooked them up to all these machines so he could understand their physiology, and he began asking them a series of questions. He just interviewed these newlyweds. And he basically said, all right, tell me about how you met. Tell me about your wedding. Tell me about your honeymoon. Tell me about all these things. Then he would say, all right, tell me about a big fight you had. Tell me about the last fight you had. So they talk about conflict. And then he would say, all right, tell me about your future. Tell me about your hopes and dreams. And he just let them talk. And they just talked and talked and talked, and then they left. And he did this study. He followed these couples for 6 years. And what he ended up doing is divided these couples into two categories. And I need to make it clear, he named these categories. I did not name these categories. John Gottman named these categories. But he separated the couples into two groups. One group he called the masters, and one group he called the disasters. You're with me. All right? There were the masters and there were the disasters. And after 6 years, the masters were still happily married. After 6 years, the disasters were either divorced or very unhappily together. And so as he's looking at that, he starts going back over his research and he tries to figure out, okay, what's the difference? So he goes back to that first encounter and he studies the physiology. Because on the surface, the disasters and the masters look exactly the same. They're sitting in their room, they're having a conversation, they're telling their stories, they're even smiling. They look exactly the same. But then he went to the data. He went to the physiological readings, and he was blown away by what he found. The masters, their physiological insides matched what he was seeing on the outside, but the disasters was completely different. The disasters, the entire time, they were sitting with their spouses, talking about their marriage, talking about conflict, talking about their honeymoon, talking about anything. Their heart rate was elevated. Their blood pressure was elevated. They were sweating. They were breathing harder. Their entire adrenal system was activated. And what he discovered was that their bodies had gone into fight or flight mode, which is literally an internal response to danger. So even though the couples were sitting beside each other having a conversation about marriage, their insides felt like they were fighting off a shark attack. Everything internally was wired for danger. It was wired to protect. It was wired to defend. They were completely on edge. And here's what he said. He said, it's not that the masters had by default a better physiological makeup than the disasters. It's that the masters had created a climate of trust and intimacy that made both of them more emotionally and thus physically comfortable. And again, this was purely from observing. He could see from the data, okay, there's a different climate in these people than there is in these people. And over 6 years, he realized these people stay together, these people don't. And so the next question was, okay, how do we create this climate? Was this just an accident? Are these people just naturally better at marriage? And so he set up a second experiment. And in this experiment, he brought the couples in for an entire weekend, and they stayed at a bed and breakfast so that he and his researchers could observe them. Now, pause, because that's weird. I'm like, who are these people that sign up for this? But anyway, they did. And so they spent an entire weekend at this bed and breakfast, and pretty early on, he made a pretty astonishing discovery that over years he's tested and tested and tested, and now he's proven that it's accurate. What he discovered was that there is something we all do in relationships. Sometimes we do it consciously, sometimes we do it unconsciously. But we send out signals that we need something. And the way he talks about these signals, he called them bids. And what he noticed is that the married couples would bid. And a bid is simply a request for connection. That's what a bid is. It's a request for connection. It's a request to receive back something. It's like when you think of something funny during the day, and maybe you text your best friend or you text somebody the joke. You are really trying to connect with them. It's why once you text the joke, you're not done with the joke. You keep checking your phone until they respond to the joke because you want a response. And so you look, and there's no response, and then you get those bubbles. You're like, oh, they're writing back, and you get all excited, and then the bubbles go away, and they never respond. And you're like, I had bubbles. Where'd they go? Well, see, you would send out a bid. You had sent out a request for connection. And what Gottman discovered is that we are doing this in relationships constantly. We are constantly sending out these bids into our relationships to kind of test the waters. And the example he used, that I guess he observed, was a husband and a wife, and they were sitting in a living room. The wife was sitting on the couch. She was reading her book, and the husband was looking out the window. And the husband was a bird watcher. He loved birds. And the husband sees a goldfinch. And he says, honey, look, it's a goldfinch. That was a bid. That was a request for connection from her. She then had a choice. She could turn towards him and his bid and give him the connection he's asking for, or she could turn away from him and ignore the request. She could be reading her book, and she could say, that's nice, and keep reading. She could say, I'm reading. Or she could put the book down and say, honey, I'd love to see the bird. And we hear that, and it sounds so silly, right? It sounds so innocent. It sounds so like, what are you talking about? Bids and looking at birds? What does this possibly matter? Here's what he discovered. Couples who had divorced after a 6-year follow-up had turned toward bids 33% of the time. Only 3 in 10 of their bids for emotional connection were met with intimacy. 70% of the time, their bids were swatted down and ignored. But watch this. The couples who were still together after 6 years had turned towards bids 87% of the time. 9 times out of 10, they were meeting their partner's emotional needs. That was it. The masters turned towards, the disasters turned away. And here's why this matters for us. Because do you know what a bid is? Do you know why we're naturally sending bids into the world? while we're naturally trying to check on the relationship? A bid is our way of asking any given moment, what is the climate of this connection? Is it safe? Is it good? Are they for me? Are they against me? Is he in a good mood or is he in a bad mood? Is she going to be okay with this, or do I need to leave her alone right now? Oh, it's been one of those days. Yeah, I better wait for tomorrow. That's all we're doing, is we're sending out a bid. And what he discovered is the relationships that lasted consisted of two partners who understood that. And when the bid was sent, they responded with kindness and love, and they turned towards. Because here's what they knew. The safer the climate, the stronger the connection. Now, I tell you that entire story, one, because I think it's fascinating. I admire anyone who spends 40 years doing research. Two, because I think it's very, very helpful. I believe it's very illustrative of what we want to talk about over the course of this series. But the real reason I tell you that story is because one of my favorite things to do as your pastor is to show you when 40 years of science simply proves an eternal principle of God. Because that's all he did. I kind of feel bad for him. I wish I could have told him 40 years ago, hey bro, just read Jesus. He'll tell you all this. But he had to go do the work. And what he discovered is what Jesus taught us 2,000 years ago really does matter. And here's what he said. He says, this is my commandment. Love each other in the same way that I have loved you. That's it. What these people were exhibiting was a level of love that Jesus himself exhibits. And that's what he discovered. When people feel safe in relationship, when people feel like they can count on the relationship, they let their guard down and they stay. Which was Jesus' entire point. The entire point of Jesus' love for us is for us to feel safe in his love. And for us to feel accepted by him. And the reason he told his disciples, not once, but twice, by the way, on the same night, which you may have missed, is this is John 15. If you know this story at all, when Jesus gives this commandment, he gives it at dinner with his disciples on the night he was going to be arrested, before he was going to be killed the next day on a Friday, and then come back to life on a Sunday morning. At dinner, he says, I have a new commandment for you. Love each other just as I has loved you. That was in John 13. This is John 15. They were at dinner. Now they are walking to the place where he's going to be arrested, and he has to say it again. Why? I think he was winking at parents. That's why. I think he was winking at parents. He was saying, hey guys, even I have to repeat myself multiple times. You know, like you give your kids instructions in the car before you get into the restaurant, and then right before you walk in the door, you repeat those instructions again. Here's what we're going to do. We are not getting kicked out of this restaurant. Even Jesus, he understood, he did it again. He said it again because he knew it was going to be that important, because he knew, because his dad said, it is not good to be alone. We need relationships. We need connection. And he knew we were going to struggle. And so he gives us this world-changing advice. It's simple. Bring the love you receive from me to the people you're connected with. That's the ballgame. That's the answer. Now here's the reality. We could spend years talking about what that actually means. In fact, that's what we do just about every week here as a church. But for this series, what I want us to do starting today is we're going to try to kind of hone it down to 4 specific things. We're going to talk about 4 keys that I believe we receive from Jesus that we can bring to our relationships to create a safer climate. Now, please don't miss what I just said. One of the things I love about our church is that we have people every week who attend, who watch online, who don't have a relationship with Jesus. You're just kind of checking out the things of God, and you're kind of wondering if he's real. Well, he is real. And what we're going to talk about for the next few weeks is going to be practical. It's going to be helpful. But it's really only going to be possible through a relationship with Jesus, because we cannot give Jesus his love until we have received Jesus' love. It's impossible. And so just know that as we're talking, if you find some of this difficult, you can just say, you know what, I should probably become a Christian. I should probably begin a relationship with Jesus, because that would probably open some things up, because it's only as we receive it that we can give it. It's only as we receive that perfect love, that safe love, that never-ending love, that we can even begin to have the concept of giving it to other people. Because not only is it this big concept, there are actually 4 specific traits, 4 specific things we're going to talk about over the next 4 weeks that I believe we receive from Jesus that we can bring to a relationship to improve the climate instantly, to improve the general condition of the relationship. Jesus just laid the groundwork. Love like I love. That's the goal. And then in the next verse, he gives us the first step. He gives us the first trait, the first key, the thing that is required for all relationships to thrive. And here's what he says. He says, there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. In other words, there is no greater way to show you love someone. There is no greater way to create safety in a relationship. There is no greater way to create certainty in a relationship than to lay down one's life for that person. Now, Jesus meant this literally because he was about to go do this. He was about to go lay down his life for his friends. But if you read the totality of his teachings and you understand what he was saying, he was also being bigger. He was saying, live this emotionally. Look for ways to emotionally lay down your life for the people you are connected to. And what he was doing is he was really revealing to us the first of the 4 keys to a safer climate. And what is it? It's one word: sacrifice. Relationships will not thrive without sacrifice. They won't. Relationships thrive when the other person knows their needs matter more to you than your wants. See, if Jesus were speaking today, I'm not sure he would say lay down one's life for a friend. Or maybe he would have expounded. And he would have said, there's no better way to show love than to lay down your phone for someone else. There's no greater way to show love than to lay down the remote for someone else. There's no greater way to show love than to lay down your hobbies for someone else. There's no greater way to show love than to lay down your ego for someone else. This is a fundamental eternal truth of God that has now been proven by science. What was the major life-changing takeaway of the Gottman study? When the bid went out, the couples that were successful, the other person put down the book and they looked at the bird. You know what some of us need to do? Put down the book and go look at the bird. Respond to the bids that are coming to us in our lives. Or stop being confused why the relationship isn't working. Stop looking for ways to show love. Because here's what Jesus is saying. You know the greatest way to show your spouse you love them? It's not a trip. It's not a new house. It's not a diamond ring. It's not a new car. Put down the book and look at the bird. Let them know, you know what? You need this right now. So I'm going to put away what I'm doing. You got my full attention. How can I help? There is no greater way to show love, Jesus says, than to lay down one's life for someone else. To lay down one's life, to lay down one's preferences, to lay down one's conveniences, to lay down one's schedule, to lay down one's goals for someone that they love. So, here's your challenge and we're done. This week, my prayer for you, and I'm going to ask you to pray as you leave here today, is for God to open your eyes to the bids in your life. To open your eyes to the bids you're receiving from the connections. To open your eyes for their requests for connection. Just to be aware of them. And as you become aware of the connection, understand what they're actually asking. They're asking, what is the climate of this connection? What's the general condition? Is it safe? Is it okay? Am I bothering them? What is the climate of this condition? And then, if you're praying already, ask Jesus this question. When you realize, hey, they just sent a bid. They're requesting connection. Ask this question. Hey, Jesus, how would you respond? And if you have a relationship with Jesus, here's what he's going to say. Well, you don't have to wonder how I would respond. The last time you asked me for this, here's how I responded. Here's what I did. See that? I dropped everything for you. Remember the whole, I was in heaven. I was perfect. I gave that up, put on skin, came to earth for 33 years. That was for you. Because I loved you. And I wanted you to know I loved you. And I know there was no greater way for me to show you I love you than to put aside what I want for what you need. If you've ever read the Gospels, you know there's a point. After Jesus tells them to love like he loved, and before he's arrested, where he prays, and he says, Dad, I don't really want to do this. Hey, Dad, is there any way that I can avoid this? Can you please take this cup from me? Then he said these words, not my will, yours be done. And then he laid down his life for us. And it's what makes us feel safe. It's what assures us we can trust him. So this week, as the bids come in, as you receive their request for connection, remember, they're asking, what is the climate of this connection? And then remember what we learned, both from Jesus and from the study. The safer the climate, the stronger the connection. So I hear you saying, okay, wait, so how much of a priority should I make them? Like, how much should I sacrifice? Well, how safe do you want it to be? What do you want to bring to that connection? I said, I know you have questions. And I told you would. That's why we're just getting started. We have 3 more weeks of this content. But we can't do it all at once. We have to take time because we're busy. We're doing other things. And this conversation is too important to rush through. So for this week, just say, hey, God, make me aware of the bids in my life. And make me aware of how you would respond. And then give me the ability to respond that way. Give me the ability, God, to put down the book and look at the bird. Because there is literally no greater way to show your love for another person than to lay down your life. And so what climate can you bring to a relationship? That's all we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what we can control. Last time I checked, I cannot control what other people do in a relationship. So we're not going to talk about that. We can control this. So I pray God makes you super aware of the connections in your life, makes you aware of the bids, their requests, and it gives you the capacity to turn towards in his name. And even this week, even after one sermon, I promise, you begin to put this into practice. You begin to respond like he does. You're going to see a change. It might be small, but you'll see it. Because here's what I know, because I've lived it. God's principles are true, and his word is perfect. And when we build our lives on that, we can withstand whatever comes our way. Let's pray. Oh, Heavenly Father, we just love you so much. And God, we are just so thankful for your Son. We're so thankful for the clarity of his word. God, we're just so thankful that you can so clearly show us the secret to successful relationships. Father, it's your love. This week specifically, may we bring sacrifice to the table. May we look for ways to lay down what we want for what the people in our lives need. May we be reminded that is the greatest way to show them we love them. And as we do that, Father, may the climates grow safer, and may the relationships go stronger. We love you, and we cannot wait to see what you're going to do over the next few weeks. So in your son's amazing holy name we pray.